This video is brought to you by Squarespace.
Hello everybody, welcome back to another King James video and the very first installment of a brand new series here on this channel called Street Annotations. Now Street Annotations is actually an idea from a good friend of mine, Sissy Lou, and I was showing her some photographs that I kind of marked up. And when I first started getting into street photography, I would go print my photographs 4x6 and I would take a red Sharpie and essentially just kind of annotate my images. And I did this for years because it helped me kind of understand, what exactly I was looking for, and the way it translated into the street immensely helped by simply just reviewing my photographs. And so I wanted to provide a resource for you folks here by breaking down my photographs and highlighting one specific lesson, or I guess you could say some type of theme, so you can get a better understanding of what I was seeing before I made the photograph. So I want to get a gauge from this video. If you enjoy this video at the very end, please drop a like down below. I'm open to any real suggestions, so leave them in the comments down below. Everything in this video is purely my interpretation as well as my own opinions. But without further ado, let's jump right in. Alrighty folks, so the topic for this episode of Street Annotations is easy leading lines. And leading lines are essentially the main compositional, I guess you could say, element that I would consider learning first. The reason for this is because they are absolutely everywhere. You can go anywhere in this world and you will find a million leading lines. Now, the reason why they are so powerful in street photography is because the leading line is going to help you tell your story. The leading line is meant to give the viewer a clear path at what to look at in the frame. All right, so I have my iPad set up here in front of me with a couple of different examples of leading lines in my photography. And I'm going to go over a wide different array of them, but I'm going to start off with something that is extremely simple that everybody can essentially do themselves. All right, so let's take a look at this first photograph. Now, this was made in Hawaii, actually with the Leica M6 and a 28mm lens. Now, when looking at this photograph, there is a couple of different leading lines, but the main one here is going to be kind of this seawall right here. So when approaching this scene, the seawall was the first kind of element that I look for. And some photographers are going to look for a moment first before composing. This scene in particular, I happen to look for composition before the moment. So I planned it myself and I made sure that this leading line was going to be sort of the main anchor of the photograph. Now, after, establishing my strong leading line there, I noticed that we had this beautiful family right here kind of just waiting to essentially jump into the water. And there's a little bit of tension when it comes to this because, you see the kid kind of lining up or getting ready to jump. You have the dad holding on to, looks like, his daughter, it could be. There's tension with it, and it kind of builds the story as to, where we are in the frame. They're swimming, they're in the water, they're in the ocean. And that's kind of the story that I wanted to portray. It was a beautiful scene nonetheless, and I wanted to find a way I could do this using strong compositional elements. Now, the way I like to use leading lines is I always make sure that there is a payoff. Now, if you look here on the very bottom of the screen, this is where the leading line starts. It's going to go all the way up through the people, and it's going to pay off there at the very end, which is going to be the city. And that's something you should keep in mind as well. Effective leading lines are going to drag your eye from one side of the frame to the other. This way, your eye is following that line and leading it up into the frame, and you can see different things along the way. Now, if you think those are the only two leading lines in the frame, you are incorrect. If you can't tell already, everything is pointing towards the left direction of the frame. You have this leading line, which is going to be the beach line, headed that way here. And you also have this sort of downward slope of the buildings leading over into the left side of the frame. And this is what I mean when I say leading lines are everywhere. There's the main leading line that I intentionally placed in the very dead center of the frame to kind of lead my eye through. But there's also the leading lines of the beach, the towers, and if you didn't even see this right here, the waves as well. Now, motion can act as a leading line. And I think that's something that, we tend to overlook, right? Because it's not always something that is going to be solidified in the environment. Movement is something that is fading and evading quickly. And I made sure to wait for a nice wave to kind of catch behind them because it's going to draw more drama to the situation, right? This kid's about to jump. Oh, the dad is right there holding his daughter. And then there's this gigantic wave kind of splashing right into the back of them. What could happen? You're drawing those different questions. You're making it open-ended. And that's something that you want to keep in mind as well when making photographs. Now, I want to show you guys that leading lines are really everywhere. This is a scene from San Francisco. Some folks playing volleyball. You have this right here, the Transamerica Tower, which is going to be my main anchor of the frame right here. And all this is pretty simple. You're going to have this leading line of the quartz working your way up and goes on the other side as well, up there. Also, look at the direction in which the individual who is jumping is pointing towards. He's hitting it towards the buildings over there. And so you have all of these, crazy lines pointing into that direction that essentially help tell that story. I mean, look at the building up here on the top as well. That's a leading line as well, heading that way. This building line on the back side of the net here is also a leading line. And again, the motion, right? Which way is he hitting? He is hitting this way. All of these lines are leading to the payoff, which is, of course, the main anchor, the Transamerica Tower in the background. So, leading lines can be used in so many different ways. Here's another example of it right here, where essentially I'm just taking this is an older photograph, by the way. This is like 2018. I'm essentially taking this crosswalk and using it as a leading line to my payoff, right? And that's the thing. Every leading line should have three major things. Number one, you need to use leading lines that go across the entire frame. If you have a leading line that cuts short in the middle, just make sure that there is, number two, a payoff. Every leading line is going to drag your viewer's eye from one point of the photograph to the next point. And the third thing with a leading line here is that you need to have a sense of direction. Now, in the second half of this video, I want to show you a little bit more of an advanced way to use the leading line. And this is going to include not just, what you see on the ground. But before we get into that, folks, I want to give a huge thank you and shout out to the sponsor of this episode, which are the good folks over at Squarespace. Squarespace is your all-in-one platform to build a beautiful online presence and run your business. Now, Squarespace makes it super simple to create your very first website. With cutting-edge design tools like Blueprint AI, you can essentially select a couple of questions to answer, and it's going to craft and tailor your website. You can also create an e-commerce shop to sell photographic prints, digital media, and the best part is there's so many different tools within Squarespace's e-commerce program, which essentially allows you to run your business by yourself. And probably the most important thing is to create a beautiful portfolio to display your work professionally. And Squarespace has a ton of different templates you can use to essentially drag and drop your photographs to create a stunning design within minutes. So if you want to get started with your own professional website today, head over to squarespace.com/KingJapes and enter promo code KingJapes at checkout to get 10% off of your first purchase of a domain or a website. Huge thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. All right, so I want to show you now some unconventional ways to utilize a leading line. And I'm going to start it off here with probably this one right here. But the reason why this image has more complex leading lines is because it kind of drags your eye into a couple of different directions, but each leading line has a payoff. And that's the thing. If you're going to use a leading line, make sure that it has a payoff, whether or not it goes in, one direction or not. For example, the direction in which my foreground, which is going to be this individual right here, is traveling is just straight down to the right side of the frame. So I'm going to draw a couple of arrows on the frame here on his actual body to show the direction in which my subject is traveling, right? So now this establishes the movement of the frame. Now, it's kind of interesting because, I said earlier, you need to have a direction when using a leading line. And when I made this photograph, the immediate leading line that I saw was this very strong one here on the bottom of the frame. But you could see that the leading line facing that way, it doesn't really, show you any payoff. At the end of it, there's nothing really here. And that is because the leading line can work in both directions. Yeah, you can look at it in the direction in which he is facing towards the bottom of the frame, but you can also say that this leading line drags you to the left. And what do you get at the left side of the frame here? You get that individual right there, the guy running with the red shorts. So we have the leading line on the bottom here that is at the direction in which, the foreground here is traveling. You can also interpret that leading line to lead up into the left corner of the frame, but you also have a couple of different leading lines in this frame. The first one is going to be the soft breaking of the water here on the beach. These are all leading lines and they go straight towards the main individual in the front here, the guy walking. Next, you have these leading lines right here, which are also headed towards the direction of our individual in the front. But this time the payoff is going to be in the middle of the frame. You have a couple of different subjects there that you can essentially drag the eye to. And I know this looks complicated and I know it looks extremely, I guess you could say, complex. But when you break this down, it's actually very, very easy. All I did in this frame was look for that main leading line, and I noticed that water was breaking, and I made the photograph when I felt that it was right. And this is something that I learned really early on in street photography. It's that, you can set up your composition all you want and you can try to be technical, but really photographs are all about feeling. When do you feel like it's the right time to click the shutter? Do you feel like this, story evokes emotion? So, as much as I would love to say that this was the perfectly framed photograph that I'm annotating it to be, half of this was luck. I got the guy walking straight through. Really what I waited for was the subject here in the front, the guy walking on the little side curb here. I waited for him to get into the middle of the frame. And at that time, the guy in the top left corner started running. So you're going to have opportunities where you might have more leading lines in the frame, but you might only see one in the beginning. Let's take a look at another, very similar situation. This was made in 2018. The main subject is obviously going to be the little girl here running with a balloon, but I didn't think of leading lines in this photo. This was a photograph that I made because I saw a red balloon and I saw her running across the street, and it was just this pure kind of like beautiful moment. But if you look at the way the leading lines are positioned, they're not really going in the direction of travel, I guess you could say. She is running this way. And if you look closely, the only leading line that is kind of heading that way is going to be this back one right here, right? And then I guess the angle of the street. So you are getting a sense of direction. All of these different lines are leading towards that side of the frame. And so that's why it can work in those situations. But not every time are you going to see leading lines first. You might see the kind of story first. Here's a great use of an unconventional leading line. Obviously, this is a very simple way to use it, but the direction in which the birds are flying, right? So, the main subject of this entire photograph is going to be this individual right here. Essentially, look at the direction in which his head is facing, right? It's going to be headed that way. And that's why I was just waiting, and timing, it was perfect to just be able to capture that. And that's the beauty of street photography. You're not always going to be able to plan these moments. You might want to fish at a spot for a little bit and kind of set up your composition and wait for things to happen. But then there's going to be times where they just approach you in this way, and you have to kind of take that and, make great use out of it. That's a really unconventional way to use a leading line, I feel like. Here's another really great example of, direction, right? So this photograph, the reason why I feel like it works, and by the way, this was taken in 2019 in the Philippines, but this was right after a huge monsoon, and it knocked over a tree, a really old tree in someone's yard. I was walking down the street, and I saw these guys cutting up, the tree, trying to break it down. But they had somehow jacked in a machete in the middle of the tree. And I went up to it and I utilized that as the main leading line. So this right here is going to drag my eye across the frame. Very, very strong leading line. So my recommendation is, if you're going out into the street, look for those strong leading lines that are going to essentially anchor your photograph. From there, it's simple. Just figure out how to place certain subjects in your frame that the leading line is going to essentially pay off. Now, the payoff on this one here is the fact that you're looking through a ton of different mystery. Like, who is this? His face right here is hidden. Look at the direction of the arm, right? It's all leading towards that one way again, the tree. Look at the bottom right corner, right? It's leading this way here. The point is, look for the strong leading line first and use that to establish your frame. And this brings up my last photograph that I want to show you here, because this is probably the most intense use of a leading line. And many of you guys might say, oh, this looks just like Henri Cartier-Bresson's photograph, the famous bike photograph in Paris. I think, is it Paris? I could be wrong. And that was the main inspiration for the photograph. I've seen these staircase. I've always wanted to take a photograph there, and it just so happened that when I was there, a bike came through. Now, if there's one thing that I want you to take away from this video, it's that the leading line is only going to be effective if it goes through the entire frame. The more the leading line goes through the frame, the better of a payoff it's going to be, as long as you make sure that there's something on the way or just at the very end of the line. So here's what I was looking for initially, right? So I could have, angled my camera a couple of different ways, but I made sure that I had one leading line that was just dragging through the entire frame. And this is how it went. It went from this frame all the way back this way. All right. Look at this side of the stairs, same thing. It's going this way. Look at this handrail right here. It's leading down to the bottom left corner. Look at this line on the top. It's leading towards the left side of the frame. And then look at the direction in which the biker is traveling, right? The reason why this leading line works, even though it's not just a straight leading line, is it's still pointing in the direction of travel. So if you can utilize the leading line to show the movement of the frame, to show where, your subject is headed towards, it's going to be very, very strong. And these annotations sometimes make it look more complicated than it needs to be. But really, folks, once you start paying attention to these lines in the world, it's going to be extremely easy for you to use it. In fact, one way I like to, kind of practice this is if you take a rectangular frame that's going to represent a photograph and take a pen or a pencil, you can put that pencil across the frame, something like this, and it's essentially going to show you how you need to use a leading line. And you can position it in different ways. You can go like this, you can, do it this way, you can change the direction, you can angle it like this, you can have some that are going to be pointed up this way, but the point is that's how you want to use a leading line. You want to make sure that it drags across the frame so your eye can go from one side and go to the other. And along the way, you're going to share the journey of this person, or maybe at the very end there. And this is why people like to take photographs in the streets, right? Because the street is always going to have a natural leading line. But when you go out into the world, find 5 leading lines every single day and make a photograph of just the leading line. Learn how to position it in your frame. Move your camera in different angles. What does it look like from above? What does it look like eye level? What is it going to look like if I point down? The perspective in which you hold your camera is always going to change the leading line. And if you can learn how to utilize them into your frame and incorporate your elements that are going to be along the way of it, you are going to make some extremely, extremely powerful photographs. But folks, that is going to wrap up this episode of Street Annotations. If you enjoyed this video, drop a like down below. It's going to help me kind of understand whether or not I should continue this series, as well as if you have different suggestions, like I said in the beginning, drop those in the comment section down below. I'd love to open up a submission as well for viewers to kind of get their photographs annotated, maybe in the future, but I'm really excited to bring more of this series to you. So that's going to wrap it up. I'll see you in the next episode. As always, Minolta Gang.